We've already begun discussing the mouth. Let me point to the teeth. The teeth, we're really familiar with them. Different kinds of teeth in the human mouth have got different names. There are four of them on each arcade, upper and lower, these two and these two, that are called incisors. So your front teeth, one, two, three, four, these are called incisors. And incisors kind of are like a couple of shovels going past each other, and they're good for taking a bite of food. Right after the incisor, there is a tooth that we're going to refer to as your canine tooth. Canine tooth is the one that actually is sharp in the carnivores like dogs and cats, not so sharp in us usually. After the canine tooth, there are two teeth on each side of the upper set of teeth and two teeth on each side of the lower set of teeth that are known as bicuspids or premolars. Premolars. And after the premolars are the molars. Technically, humans can have three molars on each side of their jaw on the bottom and the top, but that third molar way in the back, that's what we refer to as your wisdom tooth. And most human mouths no longer actually have enough space for that last tooth. Let's look what it looks like on our model. So this would be one, two, this would be two of the incisors on the lower jaw on the left side. Here is the canine tooth. The canine tooth has been kind of dissected open on this model to reveal some of the detail on the inside of a tooth. And then we have got our premolars. The two premolars are also called bicuspids. And this particular model shows all three of the molars, even though it's common for you to have that last molar, your wisdom tooth, removed. What else do we need to know about teeth? We need to know that the part that sticks up above the gum line of the tooth is known as the crown. The part of the tooth that is embedded in the bone, either of the mandible or the maxilla, is known as the root, so crown and root. The crown is covered with a very special material known as enamel. The enamel of the tooth is the hardest substance made by the human body. It's very hard, but there are definitely some bacteria that can manage to destroy the enamel of the tooth. And those bacteria, when they destroy the enamel of the tooth, they create what we call a cavity. Let's see, the inside of a root of a tooth is known as the pulp cavity, and inside of the pulp cavity is where there are live nerves and live cells. When there's a very bad cavity, as is shown in this particular tooth, and it causes damage to the pulp cavity, you can get destruction of the pulp cavity and an infection. And that is the kind of situation where you might need a procedure called a root canal, where they dig out all of the dead infected stuff and fill it up with a sterile fill material. So make sure you know all of your teeth. What else do we need to know about the accessory organs? We need to know all of these salivary glands. The salivary gland you already learned, I think it was the very first day of lab, is this one called the parotid salivary gland. And it sits between your skin and the muscles of your jaw here. And this is the one that sometimes you will feel it kind of squeeze if you're about to taste something super sour. Parotid salivary gland. The parotid salivary gland is really important for sending out saliva that's got lots of digestive enzyme in it. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the auditorium part of the lecture. The parotid salivary gland drops its saliva off up here by your upper molars. Then we have got a submandibular salivary gland. I'm going to jump to that one next. The submandibular salivary gland is just barely right underneath your mandible. Yeah, that's why it's called the submandibular salivary gland. And then we've got salivary glands that are right under our tongue, and the ones right under your tongue are called the sublingual salivary glands. Let me show you what that looks like on our lab model. Remember, if you go to your Canvas homepage, you can go to the Anatomy Models website. And at the Anatomy Models website, you can see this, but let's go back and let's look at the model from the inside. And here you can see the submandibular salivary gland depicted here and the sublingual salivary gland depicted here. Incisor, incisor, that must be a canine tooth. See how the name pops up? So cool. Bicuspid, first molar, good. All right. So that's it for our jaw and our salivary gland. Let's talk a little bit about the stomach. Food is going to go from your mouth into your pharynx, down your esophagus, and drop into this J-shaped organ that is called the stomach. The stomach is mostly on the left side of your body, and it starts out here with a region called a fundus. The fundus is kind of like the bubbled up part of the stomach as you're looking at it from the front. Most of the stomach is referred to as the body. That's what most of the stomach is. So fundus up here, most of it is the body. This area down here that kind of is like a funnel in shape is called the pyloric region. You should know that there is an entry door to the stomach called the lower esophageal sphincter. The lower esophageal sphincter is also sometimes called the cardiac sphincter because your heart would be sitting right, your heart would be sitting right here, right like that. Okay, so that's why this sphincter is called the cardiac sphincter. The exit door of the stomach is called the pyloric sphincter. I don't think there's another name for pyloric sphincter. These ridges that are in the stomach, all of these wormy looking ridges, are known as rugae. The rugae, those ridges, allow your stomach to expand without tearing when you've got a really huge meal, maybe like Thanksgiving. From the stomach, where does the food go next? The food goes into the small intestine. And what's the name of the first part of the small intestine? Remember DJ ileum, the world's worst DJ? The letter D stands for duodenum or duodenum. I wanted to give you a bigger perspective of how everything is organized in the stomach, in the abdomen, this part of the digestive tract. Now, this particular artist's rendering has everything kind of separated out. That's not the way it actually is. The way it actually is very much like what you see in your models in lab. But I think it's helpful to kind of see things sort of pulled apart. The liver's on the right side, right under the diaphragm, and attached to his underneath is an area called the gallbladder, all one word. Here we've got the stomach on the left side. You can see behind the stomach, do you see it peeking out? That is the pancreas kind of peeking out. And from the stomach, food goes into the duodenum, then it goes into the jejunum. It's hard to see that here because in front of all of that, we have got our large intestine. The spleen. The spleen sits way off over here at the left side. Very difficult to see it in this image. But remember the path that food takes. It is going to go from the stomach into the duodenum, into the jejunum, into the ileum. The duodenum is only about 10 inches long. And even though the duodenum is only about 10 inches long, it gets its own name. And that's because it is tremendously important. It is the place where all of the important parts of this path of nutrition that you have is going to get added together. What gets added in there? The stomach is going to add the food that you've eaten that's now partly digested with lots of acid, is going to add that into the duodenum. The liver and the gallbladder, they're going to send this green stuff called bile into the duodenum, and the pancreas is going to send all of its digestive enzymes here into the duodenum. Everything gets mixed together there at the duodenum. After the duodenum, everything's going to go into the jejunum. The jejunum is the second part of the small intestine, and it's not particularly long, much longer than the duodenum, though. However, almost all of breaking apart the molecules of nutrition and almost all of the absorbing of those monomers that your nutrition has been broken down to, almost all of that happens in the jejunum. The jejunum is tremendously important. The ileum, the third part of the small intestine, is the longest part of the small intestine. So you would think, oh, that's where most of the absorption of nutrition happens, but no. No, most of the nutrition is absorbed before it gets into the ileum. The ileum is just absorbing that last part of nutrition, and it is also absorbing quite a bit of the water that is found in your digestive tract. Then we go down here into the large intestine. And the large intestine is also known as the colon. The door between the small intestine and the large intestine is called the ileocecal valve. The ileocecal valve can also be called the ileocecal sphincter. And it's called that because it's between the ileum, which is the last part of the small intestine, and the cecum, which is the first part of the large intestine. Hanging off of the cecum is our appendix. Don't forget that. Now, when food goes in here, some of it can go down into the cecum, but it kind of has nowhere to go from there. It ultimately needs to turn around and go up the ascending colon, across the transverse colon, down the descending colon, through the sigmoid colon, then the rectum, and through the anal canal and the anus. Let's look a little more closely at the colon or the large intestine. Here we have the ileocecal valve, right? Ileocecal valve. So on this particular image, the artist has basically removed the stomach, the small intestine, all of that. And so you just barely see the last part of the ileum, and you can see it here at the ileocecal valve. Ileocecal valve always looks funny to me. It always looks like someone just like popped one tube into a larger tube. The food could go down here into the cecum. Human cecums are not particularly large compared to many animals. Hanging off of the cecum is the appendix. The appendix is not as optional as we've been telling everyone for a long time. It's probably a very important part of your immune system. But food will go up the ascending colon, across the transverse, down the descending, through the sigmoid, rectum, anus. Let's say a little bit more about the structure of the large intestine in our next video.